Welcome to the Sorted Out SI League Guide for France, where we'll look at the league structure within Football Manager 2023 and run through a few save ideas if you want to start your career in France. On FM23, France has 4 playable levels with 7 divisions and a total of 113 playable teams. The season in France is a traditional European winter season, so runs from roughly August through to May, and will cover all of the levels of the playable pyramid, including European qualification and the domestic cup competition. Right, we'll start our guide with the top tier, Ligue 1, which is a 20-team league, in the first season at least, playing a double round-robin schedule for a total of 38 games. This is just for the initial 2022-23 season, however, and we'll cover future seasons in a second, but that initial season sees a total of 6 European qualification places on offer. 5 are guaranteed for Ligue 1, with the 6th being dependent on the winner of the Coupe de France. At the other end of the table, the bottom 4 sides in that first season are relegated automatically down to Ligue 2. In terms of squad registration, there's a limit of 4 non-EU players, and as always, a list of nations that are treated as EU can be found on the competition's rule page, but there's not much more to consider really in terms of squad registration. Now, we've mentioned the changes to the format for the 23-24 season, and this is going to be a recurring factor in France. The league for 23-24, so the second season on FM23, shrinks down to 18 teams from that second season, reducing the number of games down to 34 teams across the season. The only other main change is to the relegation places, which also reduced down to just the bottom 2 teams getting automatically relegated, and the 16th place team heading into a relegation playoff against teams from the tier below. And now if we look at that tier below, Ligue 2, we can see the same 20-team league structure in place for a 38-game season, and this changes a little bit later on, not in the second season. So promotion is simply the top 2 teams receiving automatic promotion, and that continues into the second season as well. We'll cover that one. Yeah, thus allowing Ligue 1 to downsize by 2 teams after that first season. Relegation is simple as well in the first campaign, with the bottom 4 teams also being relegated down into the third tier. Promotion and relegation places do change from second season, with a playoff being introduced at both ends. So the top 2 automatic promotion places continue, but 3rd through to 5th head into a playoff for promotion against the 16th place team from Ligue 1. So it's single legs, 4th playing 5th, the winner playing 3rd, and then the winner of that game, that semi-final game, goes into a 2-legged tie against the side from Ligue 1. Relegation sees 4 teams relegated down to the 3rd tier as before, but then the restructuring shifts on. So for the 2024-25 season, so the 3rd season on FM23, Ligue 2 also changes, reducing down to 18 teams, and relegation dropping down to 2 automatic places, with 16th place heading into a playoff as before. Right, so that next tier, that 3rd tier, is the Championnat National, which goes back to being an 18-team league. So that one's nice and easy. I don't think that one changes in the future, but we'll cover that. It's much easier to be relegated than promoted, especially in the first season, as just the top 2 teams are promoted into Ligue 2, with 6 teams being relegated. That continues until the 24-25 season, where the relegation places reduce down to just the bottom 4 teams, and there's also a playoff introduced, which I think is the same format as the Ligue 2 to Ligue 1 playoff. So it's 3 places going into facing the winner faces the 16th place team from the league above. We're getting several years into the future now, though, so we'll cover that one when we revisit this guide in the future. The 4th and final tier is the Championnat National 2, which is split into 4 regional groups of 16 teams each, although I think in the first season there's 15 teams in one of them due to administrative relegations or something along those lines. In FM23 at least, the structure remains the same throughout, but looking for the research for this video, it looks to be different in the real world, as the groups have reduced to 14 teams for the season that's just begun. So that might be because of teams being forced out of the league for administrative reasons rather than competition reasons, but we'll cover that one when we're going to have to revisit the guide in the future once the long-term restructuring of French football is completed, because at the moment it's complicated and a bit of a mess. But anyway, in FM23 terms at least, the league stays the same at 16-team groups for four groups, at least for the first 3 seasons. In this case, the winners of each group are promoted, unless they are a B or a reserve team, in which case the highest placed eligible team is promoted instead. The bottom 3 teams of each group are then relegated into the unplayable National 3. Anyway, my head's a bit lost and spinning from the multi-year restructuring, so we're going to move on to something a little bit less complicated, but still equally complicated. It's the Coupe de France. So the National Cup is absolutely massive in France, with over 7,000 teams taking part each season, covering all amateur, semi-pro and professional teams in France, along with a whole host of French overseas departments and territories. So in theory at least, a club from Tahiti could win the Coupe de France, which is a bit mental. But never mind. In real life, so it's different in real life to FM23, we'll cover the differences. In real life, the Coupe de France has a preliminary round, or did at least for the 22-23 season, for teams from Mayotte, and then begins with nearly 6,000 teams in the first round, which is bonkers. Clubs from the Championnat National 2 enter in the 4th round, but in FM23 the competition itself doesn't begin until the 5th round, so they all enter there anyway. Which is where the Championnat National teams enter as well, and there are a total of 584 teams still taking part in round 5, which is bonkers. Sorry, it is. It should be noted that all ties in game are single 90-minute matches with penalties if scores are level, and if a side plays 2 divisions lower or more than their opponents, they're automatically drawn at home. So as a Ligue 1 side, you could be off to Tahiti, as I mentioned there in the Cup. You could be playing away in Tahiti when you enter the Coupe de France. Obviously, Ligue 2 teams enter the competition in round 7, and then Ligue 1 teams enter in round 9. So if there are any teams from Tahiti still there, you could get a really fun away day in the 9th round of the Coupe de France. If you can survive this absolute monster of a single elimination knockout tournament, the winner earns a place in the Europa League, unless they are one of the overseas regions or have earned a better qualification place through Ligue 1, and then obviously the place defaults to the league as standard. Now, with all of that mentalness covered, let's take a look at 5 fantastic save ideas for you to play in France across the multiple levels of playable football. So we're going to start with the reigning Ligue 1 champions, and now the most successful side in France, and that's Paris Saint-Germain. PSG were formed in 1970 following a merger of 2 clubs and some crowdfunding from 20,000 odd fans, and they won promotion to the top tier in their debut season. But off the pitch, turmoil and splintering of the club led to an administrative relegation down 2 levels after just 1 campaign. The club eventually won their first league title in 1986 before being taken over by TV giants Canal+, but only 1 more league title followed during this so-called golden age before crisis and decline for several years. They were close to being relegated from Ligue 1 a couple of times, but then they were taken over by the Qatar Sports Investment Group in 2011, and that massive influx of cash has allowed PSG to become instantly dominant in French football, and basically they've won 9 of the last 11 Ligue 1 titles, including the one of the 22-23 season, which is where you're going to start. So it's a simple task for you to follow. There you go. Just win all the league titles in France and see if you can get anywhere in Europe. That is your task as PSG manager. Now, despite there being tons of other options in Ligue 1, we're going to focus more on Ligue 2, because the next club up is Saint-Etienne, who are the fallen giants of French football. They're the side of former 10-time French champions, with all of those titles coming between 1957 and 1981. They were even European Cup runners-up, losing to Bayern Munich in 1976. Now, a financial scandal in the early 80s started their decline, and despite extended spells in Ligue 1, they've since never really looked like the side they did at their peak. They were relegated back into Ligue 2 via the playoffs at the end of the 21-22 season, and to make matters worse, they were deducted 3 points for pitch invasions and general fan misbehaviour in those playoffs for the following season, and I think they've also got 4 matches to be played behind closed doors. I don't know whether that carries into FM23 or not, but the points deduction definitely does. So can you overcome that points deduction and lead Saint Etienne back to the top of French football where they belong? And can you catch PSG before they set the target for too many league titles victories far out of your reach? Right, next we're going to stick to Ligue 2 and return to the capital city. We have Paris FC, and now this was one of the teams who were originally merged to form PSG back in the early 70s, but then they broke away again 2 seasons later. Basically, I think they got extra funding from the city council to be within the city limits, and PSG weren't, so they basically took their spot in Liga, and PSG got their relegation that we've already mentioned. But the club had contrasting fortunes with PSG, and they fell out of Liga about the same time that PSG were rising back to the top. And the team would fall on hard times and were languishing down in the 5th tier in the late 80s, before eventually returning to Ligue 2 in 2015 after a long struggle. Paris FC have not played top flight football since 1979, but they did go close in 2019 when they reached the playoffs, but they were unsuccessful in that attempt. The side have since received some controversial backing from Bahraini investors and look to still be on the hunt to return to the top. Can you lead them back into Ligue 1 and challenge PSG for prominence in Paris? Next we have Le Havre AC, who were formed by British residents in 1884 and became the first team to be French champions from outside of Paris in 1889 and 1900. I think they also won again in 1919. But they have the distinction of being just one of 2 clubs from outside of the top flight to have won that massive Coupe de France competition, doing so in 1959. They have won the Ligue 2 title a record 6 times, including the season that you're going to start managing in FM23, but they've not ever triumphed in Ligue 1. Their 3 French titles came under the old governing body, so they don't really count for Ligue 1 titles. The most recent of these Ligue 2 victories, coming in the 22-23 season as mentioned, so this is a feat you must aim to match as you look to take the side from Normandy to their first ever Ligue 1 title. And our final side are from the lowest playable tier, the Championnat National 2, and they are Les Herbiers, who are famous for being the most recent amateur side to reach the Coupe de France final in 2018. Now, Les Herbiers had a miracle run in that campaign to the final, where they didn't face a top division side until they met PSG in the final, which they ultimately lost just 2-0. They have played as low as the 7th tier, but never higher than the 3rd tier Championnat National, in which 3 days after losing that Coupe de France final, so still in 2018, 3 days later, they were relegated into the 4th tier. So they had that massive success, but it didn't translate into league performance. And they remain in that 4th tier today, so they're still in the Championnat National 2. And your challenge is to take Les Herbiers to the promised land of professional football and eventually to the Ligue 1 title. So there you have it. That is a whistle-stop tour of the playable French leagues in Football Manager, along with 5 great save ideas. If you are familiar with either real-life French football or if you've managed there extensively in the past, please head to the comments and share your thoughts, any corrections, pronunciations, and importantly, any stories of managing in France. And whilst you're there, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the Sort It Out SI channel if you haven't already, and check out more league guys. There's a great playlist coming up right here in a second, and some of the more great content here on the channel as we move forward to FM24. Thanks a lot for watching.